Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the kind invitation. Actually, I hope I'm not more confusing you now with what I'm going to say. Maybe a few words first about myself and from which perspective I'm talking to you. Veronique mentioned already that I have been working in the Central Baltic program, which is to some extent very similar to this Two Seas program because it brings together 4 member states and an autonomous region across a sea, in this case, the northern part of the Baltic and the Gulf of Finland. So very similar, let's say, setup for cooperation. But a few years ago, I moved on to Interreg. And Interreg, to make it very simple, if you look at what US projects, what kind of support service you get from the Secretariat of the Two Seas program, helping you with finding project partners, helping you in implementing your projects, bringing you together at events like this to learn from each other, to jointly promote your results. That's exactly what we are doing as well, with the only difference that our target group are not you, the projects. Our target group are the programs like the Two Seas program. So an event we would organize would look similar to this one, but in the audience we would have been sitting the representatives of the Joint Secretariat, the managing authorities, the certifying authorities, the FLCs of the programs. And within Interreg, I'm responsible, as Veronique mentioned, for the maritime dimension. We are running since several years a network of maritime Interreg programs, and so this is the other perspective from which I'm looking at the future of maritime cooperation. Now, I guess you expect an answer to the question of how does the future of maritime cooperation look like? I have to be honest, I don't have an answer. If I had an answer, I think I would get a Nobel Prize or something like that. And I also don't want to go into any kind of glass bowl reading, guessing how it might be. I would rather like maybe cause a little, waves in our heads to make you a little bit think outside of the box, and would like to ask you, although this is a midterm event of an Interreg program, although you're representing projects, forget for a moment about being a project, forget about being a program. Because at the end, what's the starting point? The starting point is that there is a maritime problem, if you want to put it negatively, or there is an opportunity, a maritime opportunity. So we can use this word societal challenge. And they look for a solution. That is kind of the starting point. Gianluca yesterday in his presentation showed this very nice graph with all the boxes, how the intervention logic of a project is connected to an intervention logic of a program. The main point again is, at the beginning we have an issue, positive or negative, and we need to solve this. And there are tools to solve it. And in our understanding, projects, funding programs are the tools to solve the problems. So whenever we talk about the future of maritime cooperation, let's start from the issue, from the topic, from the problem, from the opportunity. And one thing important to keep in mind when we talk about maritime cooperation, we might have a partly different understanding. Some might say maritime cooperation is cooperation in the maritime geography. So as soon as we have a sea in between, it's maritime cooperation. Others might say no, maritime cooperation depends on the topic, on the issue, meaning you can have a maritime cooperation without any sea in between of you. And a sea in between of you doesn't make a cooperation maritime. So this is always important to keep in mind, these two dimensions. Another point is when we start thinking from either the problem or the opportunity, the solution is not as simple as a single project. And as beneficial as single activities are for those directly involved in it, often the big problems need actually joint efforts. And the solution to be found consists of different actors, different institutions, combining different expertise from different countries, different financial resources, supporting them in their cooperation. And I was very happy to hear already yesterday during the workshops, but also during the morning panel, that in fact also you are partly already reaching out to other projects and connecting your activities to other actors to get to a bigger picture. So meaning the starting point, the what, the issue, the topic, the problem, the challenge should define how we do it and should define what kind of project, what kind of funding we need to solve the problem and not vice versa. To give you a very concrete example from the maritime sector, this is something we have been introduced by the Danish Maritime Authority some years ago. And that is a cooperation in the field of e-navigation. I'm not now going into the details of this topic, but there was a group of actors which back in 2008 actually realized we need to do something in the field of e-navigation. And they started off their efforts in the Baltic Sea region with a traditional Interreg transnational project. And during the implementation of this project, they actually realized there are other aspects which they are not able to cover with this very project. They want to develop further, they want to complement. So they developed this project into new projects, not separate, not in the meaning new like different, but connected. So kind of continuing, following up on what has been achieved during the first Baltic Sea region project. And as you can see, they moved on from Interreg funding to TEN-T funding. It continued that then they realized that whatever they developed now in the field of e-navigation would actually benefit if they enlarge the partnership, if they enlarge the geographic coverage of these cooperation activities, and they enlarged it to the North Sea region by adding on yet another project, again financed from the Interreg. And at the very end, they developed it even further by bringing in resources from Horizon 2020. The main point here in this partnership was from the beginning, they identified an issue to tackle, and then they were looking for the appropriate way how to tackle it, for the appropriate kind of projects, for the appropriate kind of funding. And they did not start the other way around saying, we have a program, let's now make a project to use the money. This idea of changing our mind to not think from, let's say, the individual project perspective or the individual program perspective, but to think from the topic, from the issue, is something which we ourselves, we Interact, actually also underwent a few years ago. This network which I mentioned to you, which we call the Knowledge of the Seas network, at the very beginning was a very traditional program network. The program authorities were sitting together discussing anything like application forms, selection criteria, eligibility issues, all of that. And back in 2015, we realized if we really want to tackle the maritime dimension, we need to do something else. We cannot talk about program management and project management, but we need to approach maritime issues from the thematic perspective and change this whole network into a thematic network where normally now when we have events, we bring together our 4 dimensions, which is the policymakers, the strategic actors, which often are macro-regional actors, strategy actors, the respective DGs from the Commission. We invite thematic experts, those who really know what they talk about. That can be a private company establishing a booking.com for yacht harbors in the Mediterranean, that can be a national maritime authority, that can be a shipping company. Still, in addition, we have the programs offering funding, not only Interreg, and we have always projects at our events, again, not only Interreg projects, which support activities in the chosen field. Since this is a midterm review event, and I'm kind of halfway through my presentation, so it fits half and half, I would like to use this also to say a big thank you to the 2Cs program. Because in our network, in the Maritime Network, the 2Cs program is one of the very active actors participating in our thematic events, contributing to it, looking very much forward to be with some of you in, I think, 2 weeks from now. We will be at the European Maritime Day in Lisbon, presenting the added value of maritime cooperation supported by Interreg. So thank you very much, 2Cs colleagues, for your great contribution. Looking forward to continue the same way. After these, let's say, positive words, let's now turn to the maybe more sensitive issues. Yes, there are uncertainties in the room, Brexit, the future of maritime cooperation programs. You might all know about the suggestion by the European Commission on new maritime programs. You might know about the reaction from the side of member states and regions on that. There are uncertainties. However, these uncertainties concern the tools. They do not concern the maritime issues on the table. Because however these uncertainties, whatever reality we will have, the maritime problems and the maritime development opportunities will still be there and need to be tackled. So again, let's rather look at the issues we need to solve than at the moment at the tools. And let's avoid speculating, because these things are under discussion. And I mean, before we, for example, don't yet know the final regulation, I would refrain from going into details, into technical operational question, how possibly maybe it could be. The important message is maritime challenges do not know borders. A simple wisdom. And they also don't know EU borders. I mean, in your region, you might end up such a situation. I'm coming from the Baltic Sea region, where we already have the situation that you have maritime issues which you cannot just solve with the EU members, but we have Russia, and many issues you cannot solve without involving also Russia. At the same time, the involvement of partners from, let's say, outside the EU is nothing, has been done in the past. There are different models. I mean, you have, if I talk about the Baltic Sea region again, you have an Interreg program which combines actually the typical Interreg with involving Norway, with involving Russia, which involving ENI. You have other Interreg programs like the Aspen program, which is about territorial evidence, where you have non-EU members participating. In my own program, Interact, we have non-EU members on board. So there have always been solutions found to deal with this issue. And the good message is also, when you look at now I'm going a bit to the draft regulations, how the legal framework which will look for the future. There is the understanding that when we talk about cooperation, we cannot split cooperation very radically into cooperation within the EU and cooperation outside the EU. In fact, as it looks now, we will have one regulation which covers actually both dimensions. And all what the cooperation across the EU external borders was has now moved, if I understood correctly, to DG Regio. So meaning there is also there the understanding that we need to look at cooperation from a more holistic point of view and not in a kind of silo thinking of certain boxes. This is a map from a database which is run by Interreg called KeepEU, which actually includes thousands. I mean, the aim is to have all Interreg projects ever financed since 2000 in this database. This is constantly growing, and this is, I just played a little bit with it because there's a thematic filter which is called coastal management and maritime issues. And if you filter that for cooperation at or across EU external borders, you see there are already activities going on. So the border issue as such is not hindering maritime cooperation. The topics I had yesterday, a bit to smile when I saw Gianluca's presentation, we had the same idea to use word clouds. Also here you see very, well-known issues dealt with at the and across the external borders, so no surprises there. One important thing is whatever the future will bring, whatever legal framework we have, whatever Brexit will mean for your area, the past is not gone. I mean, in the past years with this program in the 2Cs area, you have established contacts, you have achieved results, you have created networks. They don't disappear overnight. They are still there, and in fact, there was yesterday often the issue raised of sustainability, how to make projects live on. It's of utmost importance that you ensure the sustainability not just of your project results, but of the, call it now, 2Cs community you have created. So we can ask we can ask two ways. We can either ask, what's the future of maritime cooperation programs? And then we get nervous, afraid of what kind of operational setup we will have in the future. Or we rather ask, what's the future of maritime cooperation? And that's maybe my key message from, let's say, observing this event, from following the 2Cs program for a while, and to see the great achievements. My main message would be happy, be proud of what you have achieved in this cooperation program, in the cooperation, and use this as a basis to build on the future of maritime cooperation. Because at the end, what counts is cooperation. And I would say where is a will, where is a political will to cooperate, you will find ways to do so. Good luck.